Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. We have a special guest this week. It is Greg Molnar. Greg, we've had you on before, but how are things in the middle of the Atlantic?
Hi guys, yeah, all is good. We are still alive in the middle of the ocean.
The island's still upright, so things are good.
Yes. Shitty weather sometimes, but yeah, it's winter time.
I heard a clip not that long ago. It's an older clip, but it was a U.S. congressman that he was interviewing a general or an admiral or something, and basically he was talking about Guam, and he said, well, are you worried that the island is going to capsize? And the general with the straight face, right, because they have to have some decorum in there and they don't want to tick off the congressman. He looks at him and he goes, no, we don't anticipate that.
But the
anyway,
Maldives,
so your island didn't capsize.
No. Well, the Maldives is supposed to be gone for a few years now, and it's still there, right? So I don't know what are these forecasts about.
Yeah. All right. Well, we brought you on to talk about security in Rails 8. I don't even know where to start. Did a whole lot change, or is it mostly the same as 7.2?
Well, yeah, there are a bunch of things which are 7.2, but I think the invitation was triggered by my talk at Rails World.
Yes.
Which was titled The State of Security in Rails 8, but some of the things I mentioned were actually Rails 7.2, but I think it was still worth mentioning those because a lot of people don't even know about those new features, which were less than a year old back then. And Rails 8 wasn't even it was released at the conference, so it was a bit of a pre-planned talk.
So where do we start then?
Well, I can just list out the things which I was talking about if you guys are okay with that. Yeah. We can go through all of those and you can ask questions and we can
sounds good to me.
Chat about them. So one of the first things I mentioned during the talk was every new Rails app. This is a 7.2 feature. Every newly generated Rails application has a default dependabot GitLab CI file, which means if you are using not GitLab, sorry, GitHub. If you are using GitHub, then on your CI automatically runs dependabot, which is a vulnerable dependency checks. So if any of the gems you are using has a vulnerability published, then you are getting alerted, and then you can just upgrade and save yourself from any hassles. And
sounds good.
Yeah, I think. Yep.
Well, I was just going to say, I think most people know what dependabot is, but effectively you get pull requests if you have vulnerable versions of your dependencies.
Yeah, or even for outdated ones. That's why I don't like dependabot, actually. I prefer bundle audit, but it's basically a very similar thing, but bundle audit only alerts you about security issues. Whereas dependabot, I think you can configure it. Dependabot also alerts you about outdated ones, where usually when I work on a Rails app, my way of handling upgrades is it's like on a regular basis, like every 3 months, there is like a spike, upgrade all the dependencies. But security dependencies are different. Security issues are different, obviously. You want to upgrade them immediately. But the rest, I don't really care when a new gem comes out. If it's just a non-security issue, I will upgrade it when I do my regular upgrades.
Right. That makes sense. I do the same thing because a lot of times your upgrades, if it's a major or even sometimes a minor version, it changes the API, right? It's not just, oh, hey, you're going to upgrade this and you're going to get security goodies, right? Now, you may have to pull a major or minor upgrade version because there is a security issue and they didn't fix it in the version you're using, in which case, you have to go through the upgrade rigmarole and update your code as well as the gem. Yep. But I'm with you. I tend to tackle those things when I feel the need, right? So sometimes legitimately it's like, hey, there's a new feature in this that I need.
Yep.
But if it's the older version, how do I put this? I've been having conversations with people about like AI in programming, and it's like, hey, look, it makes you more effective in all of these different ways. And a lot of people are asking, is that going to replace programmers? And I'm like, have you ever worked on a project that ran out of things for you to work on? And the answer is, you might have had a side project that you decided was done, right? And so with this, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, until it's a real high priority, there's just no reason to do it. And so I'm with you on that.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been trying to push people to just like bundle, update, patch on like every deploy. Because like the chances of something going wrong in a patch release is like so low that like you gain so much more by like all of those security enhancements and like fixes in the patch level version that it's almost worth just like doing it if the test pass, right? Like
yeah. So what does bundle, update, patch do? Because I've used like the pessimized gem that locks in your version, right?
Yep.
And lets you upgrade from there.
Yeah, so bundle update tool, it has like a way to give it different flags of like, so it's canonical version to all the Ruby gems typically are. So as long as the gems dependencies you're using are canonicals, meaning there's like a patch level, a minor, and a major version to it, then you can just say, okay, give me only the latest, patch updates. And like, I feel like at least for like everything that Rails would touch, like the gem maintainers of those are very careful about what to release in a patch version to not like cause any issues, because like they don't want to deal with all the issues that come from that, right? Like if somebody being like, oh hey, like I have like this new like obscure thing, like they would rather just like, okay, let's make it minimal, and then in a minor major version, like it's to be expected, right? We've outlined these things, it's gone through the process. But a patch version, like it's like, hey, we fixed this thing, it's serious, like you should really integrate this.
Right. So if I have in my gem file just Sidekick and I didn't specify a version, and there's a major version update, I can do bundle update with patch flag, and it'll just update it to the highest patch version, and it won't do a major version update.
It won't even do the minor, right? So it'll keep it if it's like 3.2, it'll do that and then just like bump it to the latest one. Which, to be honest, doing that with Rails may be a little trickier because it does like
Rails is funny.
It has so many patches that get released, so if you like fall behind, but like that's why you're like, if you're deploying a lot anyway, right? Like then like getting Rails to update itself incrementally as it gets updated at a patch level is not going to be so bad. And a lot of times, if you have a good test case, which let's hope everybody does, but like if you don't, like obviously maybe you don't want to build this into your deploy process, but like if you have a good like test infrastructure, like doing a patch update, like it's gonna be almost nothing, and you'll catch most of the issues in any of the test files.
Makes
what
sense.
about deprecations? What if they deprecate things in a? I know they shouldn't, but sometimes they do, and then your logs are littered with all of the deprecation warnings.
Right.
And then you are like, oh shit, now I need to handle
Rails in particular, or
I mean, personally, I would rather have it be secure than like worry about all the verbosity of the outputs, right? Like I feel like littered logs is not great to deal with, but like it's honestly better than the alternative of having like a security hole and then like getting like pager dutied in the middle of the night, like, hey, somebody took advantage of this and we need to like start an incident response, right? Like
but that's why you should use bundle audit or dependabot with the security updates, because then even though it's a patch release, you are notified that this is an important patch release, you need to do this upgrade.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are there. Like is that the best like approach still today, is like using the audit feature? Like what does your workflow like look like for?
That's what I use. It's running on CI and it's running also in development in a Git hook. And then it's just you are notified immediately. And also on CI, a lot of people, what they forget is they set it up to run on the merge request or pull requests, whichever Git host they use, but they don't run it daily on the master or main branch, which is if you don't deploy every day, if you don't merge requests every day, then you might not be notified about an important security release. So it's a good idea to actually, the way I set it up, if I have the chance to set it up anywhere, run it twice a day on the master branch and run it on every pull request, merge request. Because then you are notified anyways. Also like weekends. So if it's on a weekend,
Yeah,
they
that's
release
true.
something on a Saturday, you are not getting notified if you only run it on pull requests.
Right, and it'll fail the build if it doesn't pass the audit, right?
Yeah, and if it fails on master, where you are not
Yeah.
expecting a build, then you will get an email notification or whatever you set up,
Yeah.
and then you will know that, oh, I need to look into this because something is up.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the day to have like, you know, Rails autopilot to just automatic, like if you have like a bunch of hobby projects that you just like, oh, like I'm not going to spend any time on this for 6 months, like just like automatically merge any updates as it comes and like resolve itself. Like I would love that, and then just come back, and then, you know, if when I'm ready to work on it again, at least it's up to date and I can like resolve any issues that there are, right? But you know, every single time I go back to a hobby project, I'm like, shit, I can't spend any time on this because I got to spend the time updating it, and then I lose that, like, you know.
You should try dependabot. I think dependabot does it. You can set it
just
to
automatically does it.
Yeah, you can.
You can
do auto matches. Yeah, for patch level, and maybe you can even do it for minor. Maybe you can do it for every level. I don't know, but you can do it for sure. And then it upgrades everything. Things might break because
right.
You might not catch it with the test, but there is a risk. But you never know. I don't know. I don't. Maybe it's just me. This is why I also don't trust AI. I trust humans more for some reason. If there is some human oversight, I trust that process like an order of magnitude more than if it's just something wholly automated.
I think it's getting better, but I don't blame you there.
Yeah, I've been liking the review process, so like automate but review. So like, you know, where they'll just like set out a plan, and then like I executed all the plan, and then notify you, okay, review this. I did these things, right?
Right.
And then if you like decide not to review it, like, okay, well that's the same as like working with a coworker that did the same thing, right? And you didn't review it, and they did it anyway, right?
Definitely. But also from a human, I expect more than from. So with AI, my issue is that I write a piece of code, right? I ask him, can you refactor this to me? It speeds back a bunch of changes which I need to review. And if I ask a junior developer, can you work on this feature? They work on it, they submit a pull request. And if they are uncertain about some things which they did, they will highlight that. Here is my pull request, but I'm not really sure about this part. Can you review that more thoroughly? But AI doesn't do that. It confidently says, this is the solution. And then you're like, okay, it's like 50 lines of changes. Am I going to focus on each 50 lines with the
You bring up a great point. Maybe what we're missing is a junior AI, right? Like that has it programmed in. I am not confident. I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
And then it can, you know, be maybe a little more cautious. I think you're onto something there.
Or weigh what it gives, because it can be confident about some parts which are like basic or it knows it well. But if you are a little bit uncertain about something, highlight that so I can review that more thoroughly.
Right.
Yeah, the issue that I run into though is that a lot of times what I get back from AI, I'm not confident that A, it would flag the right things, or B, that a lot of times I get code back that it's like like the general structure as far as like I have to loop over these things, or I have to make this kind of a request, or you know, call into this API is generally correct, and then the rest of it, it may as well have written pseudocode, right? And it's like you guessed at the method name instead of looking it up, which a human would do. They'd go look it up. How do I whatever? Anyway, we're off on a tangent. I want to get back to security. So dependabot is in there by default. You can use bundle audit if you want instead and put that into your CI. What else do we get?
Another change is really similar is Brakeman. It's also got a default CI file. So Brakeman is a static code analyzer for security issues. It basically highlights code spots where you might do something which is insecure. I think that's also a great addition. It gives you false positives. You can ignore those, but it at least makes you aware of certain things and saves you from silly mistakes. It's so easy to make a silly mistake which you don't realize. You use an insecure an API in an insecure way because you just forgot about something, and it just saves you from those issues. I think that's also a great change. or great addition
Yeah.
to us.
The thing I like about Brakeman is that, yeah, it gives you false positives, but like all of the commonly understood bad things you can do, or the traps that you more easily fall into, it's got all of that in there. And so, yeah, it might give you a false positive and say this is insecure, and you look at it and you go, no, I'm not doing what you think I'm doing, but it catches the really easy dumb stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And the next one is which is a new feature in Rails, is the rate limiting, the built-in rate limiter. I'm sure you guys heard about that one. And
I'm really excited about this.
I
yeah,
I
haven't
don't know
heard
how
about
many
this,
times.
but
I don't know how many times I've built rate limiting.
I've got an app that I want to build to replace a process we went through last year. It's part of my political stuff, but letting people register for our caucus night in Utah. We have like 900,000 party members that are eligible to attend our caucus meetings, and we got DDoSed last year by somebody who doesn't like the party. And so I'm wondering if something like this will help.
it could help, but it might not help. For a DDoS attack, I think it's you would need something like Cloudflare, which
That's
is
what I'm seriously looking at. But yeah.
So for what this one is good for, the thing this one is good for rate limiting is save you from credential stuffing attacks, for instance. You know, when there is a leaked password database and then a malicious actor will try to use all of those login details on your site to see if the same person has an account with the same credentials, and then they get
I
access to
gotcha.
the account, and then they can take over the account and do whatever malicious things. And in my talk, I highlighted a few examples from, it's actually now 2 years ago, from 2023. It was the year before, like 23andMe, the DNA analysis site, they had an issue with this. Also, General Motors had a big issue. They had a bunch of accounts taken over, and like partial credit card details leaked. And Roku, the streaming platform, also had like 500,000 of their users access details were leaked because of a credential stuffing attack.
Right.
So I think this is a really good addition to Rails to prevent all of these issues. We already had Rack Attack, which is a gem. It's a very old gem, but a lot of people don't know about that. And this is why I really like these changes in Rails, because once it's in Rails core, a lot of people are becoming aware of these issues which these tools solve. And it might not be the best for that team or that person, but at least now they are aware, oh, I need to think about credential stuffing.
Right.
And then they find a solution which works for them.
So is this in Rails 7.2 or is this in Rails 8 only?
It's in Rails 7.2. It got some improvements which only landed in Rails 8.
Okay.
And it's really simple. You add a single line to your controller, and you just set the to parameter, which is how many requests you want to allow, and you set the within, which is like the time frame. Let's say you want to allow 10 requests within 3 minutes from the same user, and then that's it. And then you have rate limiting. You can also configure which actions you want it to be called on. It's like a before filter in the controller. You can set if you want to exclude any actions or if you want to include only certain actions. You can also configure a custom response, because by default it raises a 429 header, and then you can change that and just redirect to a page, display a message, or whatever you want to do. And also another important thing to mention, initially, but the first implementation used Redis, but then it's been rewritten, and now the storage, the backend, is any Rails cache compatible storage can work. So you can use the solid cache or whatever you want, and you don't need to have Redis as a dependency.
I love that.
I love all the moves away from Redis.
The storage patterns across the board are just really great to see it become more cohesive. I really like this byline too, where you can give it a proc and say like, hey, rate limit it by IP or whatever you want to filter or scope to.
Yeah, if you would want to have something like Cloudflare, you could achieve that using that parameter. So you would set a cookie, and then you would rate limit by that cookie, and then you can handle more properly a DDoS attack as well. Otherwise, if you do it by the IP, a DDoS is usually they use a whole range of IP addresses, but it's one client. So if you set a cookie on that client, then you can identify it's the same client from a different IP address.
Yeah, I'm liking where this is going for sure. I think Cloudflare is probably the best answer for what I'm looking for, but I like this to manage your credential stuffing and things like that.
Yeah, my only problem with Cloudflare, I love them. They are really cool. It's very cheap, but I think now they are swallowing a big part of the internet, and maybe one day they will say, okay, now we are greedy. And now we start to charge an extortion amount on everybody. Let's hope they never do this, but it happened before. And they might say, yeah, now we want all the money, and now you rely on us. There is nowhere else to go. All the small competitors are gone. Now you need to pay us a lot. But let's hope they are not going to do that.
Yep.
Cool. And so the next thing I mentioned in the talk was the new authentication generator in Rails.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah. Well, we had another one before. It's called Authentication 0, which wasn't in Rails. It was done by I forgot the name of the guy. He's a Brazilian guy. I probably can't even pronounce his name properly. Lazaro Nixon, I think, or something like that. But I'm sure my pronunciation is not correct. So sorry for.
Yeah, but it was an awesome project.
Yes, it's still a great project, and it does more what the built-in Rails generator. But the thing is, even though the generator was there, other people don't know about it. Now that Rails has a built-in one, a lot of people are aware, oh, we can have an authentication generator, and they might say the built-in Rails one is not for me, but they find the other one or other alternatives. So this is why I love getting these features into Rails. And the built-in one in Rails doesn't have registration and what else? It doesn't have a few features which you would expect from an authentication flow, because I think the reason for that is the core team believes that they are custom for applications. Usually, like sign up, it's very different for a lot of applications, so they expect you to implement that one on your own. But this authentication 0, for instance, it generates all of those parts as well. If you are into a fully fledged, you just want your own code, the code to sit in the repository, but you don't want to write a line of code, I think that's a better option. If you want to have something custom and use just Rails generated stuff, then go with the built-in Rails one.
Yeah, I'm working on a generator of my own that will generate the views, because I don't like the views that I got when I ran the Rails generator. But yeah, I mean, just it's basically, I would like to build things that run on top of the built-in Rails generator, because I think it does a really good job.
Yep.
I'm curious here. I love your insight, Greg. I know it does like passwords as like the default for the generation. How do you feel about passwords with users? Like, I know there's a lot of talk around this. Like, do we go passwordless, passkeys were the future for a bit? Like, where do you see like the industry like coming together, or is it still kind of like a little bit uncertain?
Or the OAuths, that's the other one.
Or the OAuth, right? Yeah.
Somebody else is managing your credentials, and so
like
you just
Apple or whatever it is.
Yeah, so you have a token from them, and you authenticate them on the token.
Yeah, on both of those cases, I think I might not be the mainstream with my opinion. So for passkeys, I love passkeys. I use a YubiKey for two-factor authentication. I think it's amazing for that, because for that you can have multiple options. For instance, I have a YubiKey, but I have two laptops. So sometimes I don't have my YubiKey with me, and I have two YubiKeys, but I keep one as a backup at home. So I never really, that's not in a laptop. That's just if mine breaks, I can use that one. So I have multiple authentication, two-factor authentication set up at most services. I can use my phone in the app on my phone, or I can use the YubiKey, which is much more convenient when I'm at home. I just touch it and then it's done.
Right.
But for whole authentication, I think there are a bunch of things which are not so easily resolved. Like, what are you doing with logging in on your iPhone and on your Windows laptop? with the same passkey, because you can't really transfer it between devices. You can if you are on iOS
Right.
and Mac with everything. It's amazing. It's fine. It's convenient. Everything is in the whole ecosystem. But what if you have
Right.
an Android phone and a MacBook? Or so it's not so easy to transfer your credentials between different services. That's my main problem with passkeys. It will be probably solved eventually in the future. Then I will be all for passkeys. But since then, I think it's not so easy to handle all of those edge cases.
Yeah, one thing that I'm wondering, that along the lines of what Valentino's asking though, is that it seems like when folks' credentials get compromised, it is the password, right? It's, hey, here's a username and a password that'll get you into the website. So, do you favor more passwordless options? I mean, that's what the pass key is, but you've also got like magic links, or, hey, here's an email and we're going to send you one-time password, or any of that. Like, is that any more secure, or is that just an illusion?
In my opinion, not at all. Because if I get access to your email account, I have the keys to all of your
Right.
accounts, right? But usually, so it's not that clear, because also if all of the sites you signed up for support a password reset by email, then I can also take over your
Right.
account, right? So I think the solution for all of this is multi-factor authentication.
Mm,
Because even with passkeys, what if my laptop gets stolen and
right.
not stolen in a state where it's open, and then they
Hmm.
have access to all of my all I have.
Right.
Usually, this is why it should be something you know and something you have access to. Because my one password shuts it down after 5 minutes or whatever. So if someone gets access to my laptop, they can't get access to my passwords. They can
Right.
access to my YubiKey because it's plugged into the laptop, but they don't have the password. So I still have two things which they can only get one of them. Same with the email. Once someone has access to the email, they can take over your account. But it's the same
Yeah.
thing is true if it's only password. So just
Mhm.
passwords on their own, I don't think they are good enough.
So the other piece of this for me is, um how do I put this? I'm super cheap. And so, like Riverside, for example, right? I could set up an account for every single one of the hosts to be able to start the podcast. But realistically, that's a lot more expensive than setting up, a couple of generic host accounts. But then, how do you set up third party authentication for shared accounts, or two-factor authentication for shared accounts? That's been the rub, right? And so I tend to not turn it on, and then essentially just trust the people that I've shared the password out to, because I don't have a better way to do it.
You can do that actually. So I'm working on something with a team where we have the same problem, and the way we resolved it. If you set up two-factor authentication on with an authenticator app, it's just you just need a seed and it generates a token based on that seed. So we have that saved, and whenever we want to share that 2FA with someone, he gets the seed and he can have the same setup on their phone. And then you have
I will
the
have to
same
look into that.
authenticator set up on multiple devices for multiple people, so they can still have the second factor.
A
That
shared
that makes
second
sense.
factor. That's really cool.
That's been the piece that I've been missing. Is, yeah, it's like, okay, how do I share the second factor of two-factor authentication?
Or you can go down the other way, which I don't recommend, but it's quite popular. You use something like one password where you can share the
That's
two-factor
essentially what I've
authentication
been doing,
between
is
accounts.
I've been sharing the password out of
But,
one password.
but my problem with that, then it's not two-factor, because you have the password and the second factor at the same place. So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
anybody gets access to that one, they have everything they need to log
Mhm.
in. I like to separate the factors from each other.
Right. Well, that's the whole idea.
Yeah. And on the
Anyway, I
topic
may have
of
preempted other questions from Valentino, so I'll let him keep
yeah, and
minding that.
on the topic of outsourcing your authentication, I don't think that's a good idea. Actually, the Q&A, somebody asked me about this, and Okta is one a very popular
Uh-huh.
service for outsourcing your authentication. But
Okta and Auth0, but Auth0 is owned by Okta these days, so.
yeah, so they had breaches in the past, and they just had a breach after my conference talk again. Not a breach, but a security incident. But they had a proper breach a few months before the conference. And I
I
think,
mean,
yeah,
I I kind of like the approach like single sign-on took, in that it's like at least there's a rollover approach, right? Like, okay, if you've been identified of a breach, like you can invalidate everything that's in that, right,
It's true, but if you
organization.
use a password manager and you have unique passwords everywhere, if you are in a breach, it doesn't really matter because they don't have your password.
Right.
That's true.
And my problem with Okta is their attitude. I think even though they are a security company, they are more money and profit oriented than security oriented. That's what I see from their behavior. They might not like that opinion, but that's what I see. And I think they care more about sales than actually making a security. And you can see that from the security issues they had in the past, because some of them is, I don't want to be rude or just because everybody makes mistakes, but some of it you wouldn't expect from a security company.
Yeah, I will say, so when I started building top end devs, I was using Auth0, and I had two problems. Well, I had more than two problems, but a couple of the problems came into, if they were down, I was down, was one. Right, because nobody could authenticate.
Yep.
The other issue that I ran into was it was way more complicated than just allowing people to have passwords in my own system using Devise or, building my own. These days, I just roll my own. I use the Rails generator, and then I just put what I want on top of it. And so it was just overkill. And then the last issue was, I mean, literally anytime I had any kind of problem, like it, yeah, it wasn't just the complications, and it wasn't just that I was down when they were down, but there were some other issues within just the way that I had things set up, and it was easy to fall into those problems, and it affected everybody. So
Yep.
anyway.
And sometimes if there is an issue, you can't resolve it because it's out of your hands. It's on their
Right.
end or the way you implemented their integration.
Right. But
Whereas
they
if
do a lot of things for you too. So they do some level of authorization. They'll handle the third party like Google and Apple and Facebook, whatever, whoever you want to let people log in with, GitHub, like they do all of that. And so you don't have to go and jump through the hoops with an Omni Auth. Right. There are reasons why people go for it. They're probably a little bit better at security than you are, but as you're pointing out, Greg,
except Okta.
yeah, you may not know the issues that they actually have because you're outsourcing it and trusting them instead of being in your own system where you can audit and verify it. So
Exactly.
anyway, I see people use it. They seem to like it, but I think it's for those bigger apps where you're really looking for that enterprise level set of features. For the things that I was doing, it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, I also think it doesn't make sense for most organizations, but probably it does for some. I don't know. But even then, I wouldn't go with Okta for sure. I haven't heard of Auth0, which is probably a good thing. Probably they didn't have any breaches or any major
Yeah, but
security.
Okta acquired Auth0 like 3 or 4 years ago. So
Oh, so it's basically the same company now.
it's
So
more or
yeah,
less
I
the
don't
same
know.
company.
Yeah,
But for me, and I think this is what you're saying too, is do your due diligence if you're going to pick one, and make sure that you know why you're going that way as opposed to building yourself.
yeah, definitely. And one more thing I wanted to mention about the Rails authentication generator is the reason I really like this one, because Rails has a bunch of helpers which people don't know about, like has secure password, all of these new secure token generation methods and validation
Oh, those are
methods.
so nice. You use them for
Yeah,
here. So I'm going to back up for a second because I love these. So I use them for all kinds of things, right? People think, oh, I have a secure token generator that's, so I'm going to put it in my cookie as some kind of authentication key, or I'm going to use it for this other auth and that other auth. But you can generate keys for anything. And
yep,
so I've been using it. I'm trying to get to the point where I'm running my own premium podcast feeds, and it's like, hey, look, if you donate to the show, you'll get ad free stuff, right? And so you can generate tokens for that. You can generate token. Anyway, I don't mean to derail, but this is a really, really handy feature, and if you need something that's not guessable, then this makes it really easy to do it.
Yeah, and verify it is just built in. It's just super easy, or
and it's
expire and
fast.
everything. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why it's good, because you generate your authentication system, and then you read through the code and you learn from it. You just think, oh,
Yep.
what is this helper? I've never heard of this. I think this is also why it's good to have this. It just raises awareness of certain Rails helpers and features which people wouldn't know about otherwise, probably.
Yep.
And then the next thing I mentioned in the talk is, it's not really a technical change, but it's an important change. It's Rails has a new maintenance policy, which is I need to read this because I can't say that, tell it from the top of my head. So every minor releases will receive security fixes for 2 years after the first release in its series, which means in practicality, if 1.1.0 is released January 1st in 2023, it will receive security fixes until January 1st, 2025. After that, it will reach its end of life. So I think the maintenance period became shorter, which means that everybody should take upgrades seriously and don't stay on old versions of Rails, because it's not gonna get security updates. They make exceptions sometimes, but you shouldn't rely on that. In my opinion, you should make sure your apps are up to date.
Yeah, I think a lot of things have changed on that front too, though, because I've worked on a handful of apps for clients where I had to upgrade from, say, a Rails 4 or Rails 5, right? And those upgrades were often rather painful, for one. And the other thing is that, yeah, it's just, it was kind of a giant thing, and you had to take it on, and the maintenance cycle on things. Anyway, lately, with everything past about Rails 6, Rails 7 for sure, like the upgrades have not been nearly as bad. And so you're mentioning the maintenance cycle, and hey, this encourages people to upgrade, and maybe you have a different window to get security patches and stuff like that. But the other side of it is that, like, I have a whole bunch of Rails 7.2 apps that I need to get around to upgrading to Rails 8, and I've kind of been waiting for like a couple of patch versions to come out, right? So that whatever issues everybody else is finding, good on you folks, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, and and then I can go pick them up. But yeah, from what I've seen, like 7.0 to 7.1 to 7.2 to 8, they really haven't been that bad. And so it's okay, I'll spend a few days on this or a week on this. If it's a really big app, maybe it takes longer, but
yeah, it's much better. I did Rails 2 to 3 upgrades as well. That was 2.3 to 3. That was a big pain in the butt. 3
that
to
was
4 was a little bit easier. 4 to 5 a little bit easier. From 5 on, I think, it's much easier. Except when you go Rails 8, you need to ask yourself the question, what am I gonna do with the front end stuff? Are you gonna keep Webpacker, or are you killing it? Because then it might be a bigger change.
Yeah.
I remember
by the way, prop shaft,
my first
and
Rails upgrade. Yeah, prop
shaft, and all the stuff that's there. The way that Rails 8 and Rails 7 too, frankly, in a lot of ways, handles the front end stuff. It is so nice. I don't miss what is Sprockets. I don't miss Webpacker. When I moved off of Webpacker, I wanted to throw a party because it was so much easier. I mean, the issue with Webpacker a lot of people had was just setting it up and knowing how to do it. But I found myself having to tinker with it a lot. And so prop shaft, I've just kind of set it and forget it. It's been really cool.
Yeah, and the build step is always like, something fails at the build step. It's like, I need to deal with this. Yeah. And it was just slowing things down. I also didn't like that.
Import maps. I love them.
It's funny, you don't realize how stable like Rails and Ruby ecosystem has become. Because I mean, going back like to upgrades, like I was thinking of my first Rails upgrade. I did like a Rails 1 app that was on Ruby 187, which was like the nightmare Ruby to upgrade because there were just so many drastic changes, right? And so like I don't think people realize like what the early stages of a framework or a language are, right? Like because like the stability that we get now, like it's just mind-boggling, right? Like yes, there'll be some deprecation warnings or things like that, or like the big changes like are really not that big in like the grand scheme of things, right? Like if you look at like some of the other libraries out there, you like the whole like back end could get swapped out and you'll be like, well, what do I do with all this stuff I built? Like it's like incredibly stable now. It's just wild.
Yeah, and for the record, when Greg was talking about upgrading from Rails 2.3 to Rails 3, that was when they merged another framework called Merb into Rails. And so there were just major changes. I mean, a lot of stuff got a lot better, but the upgrade was painful.
Yep. Active record was pretty much completely changed. It was a lot of changes.
That said, shout out to Macandra, who like maintains the Rails LTS stuff. If you're like honestly, if you're out there stuck on a Rails upgrade and it's just like not worth it to your business, like just pay this service, Rails LTS, long-term support, and it's just like they make sure that like you're up
they
to
give
date
you
with
security
patches and we used that for a couple clients a long time ago, and it just like it works incredible out of the box. It's like turnkey.
Yeah,
we have to get them on and ask them how that all goes.
They've been around so long now.
Tricky sometimes.
What was that?
I'm sure it's very tricky to solve issues sometimes for them. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, it's got to be really because I just went to their page and they have LTS versions for Rails 2.
Crazy.
And so I'm going, boy, what what are you having to fix? And how deep into the weeds do you have to get?
Yeah, but from a security perspective, I think it's still risky to be on that old version because nobody really tests.
That's true.
Those versions, so there are no security patches or security issues made public. There might be some non-public ones which people might abuse. You just don't know about them. So I think it's because like the latest version of Rails, a lot of companies who are using Rails gets penetration tests, and sometimes issues are upstreamed from the result of a penetration test. They find an issue. It turns out, it's actually an issue inside of Rails. So we upstream the patch and fix it for everybody.
Yep, that's true.
But those old versions, I think, are not a good idea to use, even though you get some support.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the next thing I mentioned in the talk is a pretty small change. Is that CVV and CVC was added to the parameter filter defaults. But the reason I wanted to mention that in the talk is because a lot of people don't know about the Rails parameter filtering, which is a very handy tool to filter out anything sensitive from your logs. Like, when a request comes in with a password in it, you don't want that to show up in your logs. Or if you store social security numbers, you don't want them to show up in your logs before you encrypt them. And this feature is just amazing for anything sensitive, which you don't want to be in the logs. You can just add it to your initializer and then it gets excluded. These are the things which I also think Rails excels at, because a bunch of other frameworks don't really have an easy solution for this problem. But Rails is just out of the box, and for years it's amazing.
Yeah, I did have this bite me in the rear end once. But I agree. The way it bit me in the rear end was I had a Stripe webhook key that for some reason wasn't being set, and it still showed it as filtered. And so I didn't know it was empty until I actually forced it to log it out.
I see.
But yeah, this is definitely a best practice. And if you get into like HIPAA or what's the financial one, PCI or any of these,
SOC 2, ISO.
they will crucify you on this stuff if you're not
Yep.
doing it. And the logs are usually an area of vulnerability that's overlooked.
Yep.
And Rails does it by default for all the common sense stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And then the second half of my talk was these are the new features, which wasn't that many, to be honest, but still there are small progresses, and that's all we need, I think. And the second half, I wanted to highlight to people why I think somebody should choose Rails if they need an application with high security standards. And my main reason for that is there is a tool for everything you would need in the Rails and Ruby ecosystem, like parameter filtering, which we just mentioned, built into the framework, rate limiting, now built into the framework, authentication, you have device and a bunch of other things, multi-factor authentication, a bunch of gems you can choose from. It's super easy to implement all of these features. Or I have a list here. Oh, the other thing
cross-site
which is
scripting stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, cross-site scripting. Yeah, you don't even need to don't think about it. And actually, cross-site scripting you need, but cross-site request forgery, for instance, is just built into the framework for.
Yeah.
I don't even know which version, like Rails 2,
was a long time.
even. It's
it's been in there forever.
Yeah, it's so we have a lot of things which you just get for free and granted. It's amazing, and other things which are not built into the framework, like if you're talking about compliance, one of the requirements to be SOC 2 or ISO compliant is that your developers shouldn't access anything in production without you knowing about it. So if you have a rogue employee, it's not like they can just steal whatever they want. Usually they can, but at least you have an audit log, so you can pinpoint who was the malicious actor. And there is a gem from 37 Signals called Audit 1984 and Console 1984, which is if you install that, anybody who goes to the Rails console, they need to authenticate themselves, so they need to say who they are and why are they accessing the data, and then you have an audit trail. So whenever somebody accesses production data, you have an audit trail. One important thing to know about this, though, is it's advised to store this data in a read-only database. Sorry, a write-only database, so they can't. Nobody can update the data. It only writes, but you can't update. Otherwise, if somebody wants to be really tricky, they can just. Ruby is very dynamic, so they can find a way. I found a bunch of ways, but now it's much more secure than the initial release was. You can find a bunch of ways to trick the system and overwrite existing log entries. But if you store it in a database which is only you block update commands on the database connection, then it's pretty secure and safe.
When did they change that to write only? That's really awesome.
They didn't change it. You need to change that on
You
the
just
database
change it yourself.
connection.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't build that into the gem because you do it on the database level. If you build it into the gem, then you might still find a way to override it in Ruby because it's a super dynamic language. You can do things which you wouldn't even think about. That's how I found a bunch of things to bypass it. But yeah, that's a really good tool for compliance reasons. Also, static code analysis. There is Brakeman. There are other tools. Vulnerable dependencies. We just mentioned bundle audit, dependabot, and probably there are others as well. CSP, content security policies built into Rails. Open redirects. Open redirect protection is default built into Rails nowadays. So you have a tool. You have for every security requirement or need. Encryption, active record encryption. It's really easy to do now. You don't even need to think about anything cryptography. It's just you set your keys and you are good to go, and everything is encrypted in the database.
The only thing that's missing is secret scanning.
Secret scanning? You mean the repository?
Like something like Trufflehog, as an example.
Yeah. Well, but you should do that on the repository, and there are services or there are tools for that for sure, even in Ruby. I don't know any from the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there are some.
How do you feel about like storing encrypted Rails secrets in a repo?
As long as your master key is stored safely, it's a very hard to break encryption.
Yeah.
With quantum computing, we might get into trouble in a few years, but until then, we are fine and safe. And then we'll figure out how to solve it. I'm sure not us, but someone who's good with cryptography. They will figure out a way. But I think that's perfectly fine. You just need to make sure your master key is safe and secure.
Right.
And then it simplifies the whole process. You can use environment variables, but then how do you handle that during the deployment flow? How are you going to pull those from secret storage? It all adds complications and complexity.
A lot of that I've just been doing what Kamal does, so it just sticks it on the container when it runs.
Yep. Yeah, and Kamal has good integration with one password and other secret storages like the Bitbucket. Or not
Yeah, I
Bitbucket.
haven't used any of that because I'm the only one that deploys.
Yeah, then it's super easy if it's only you.
Yeah.
If it's a team, it gets a bit more complicated, but still, it's not hard to solve.
Do you have like a security checklist that you run through for Rails apps? That you make sure make sure all these things are, you know, configured.
Not really, to be honest. When I do penetration test, I have a checklist which I go through, but it doesn't really depend on a Rails app. I have some Rails specific things which I know, oh, it's a Rails app, then I need to check this and that, but a lot of it is only in my head, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, to that point, like Rails is pretty secure out of the box, right? Like,
yeah.
It's not exactly difficult to break that, but like it's not easy either, right? Like you're
Yeah,
not. I feel like with the Rails new, like it's going to be pretty hard to like do something insecure until you start actually like adding new things.
Yeah, most of the vulnerabilities I see now it used to be XSS, and it's still, I would say, that's kind of the second, but the top one nowadays is authorization. So because it's super easy to make a mistake, to forget to authorize some endpoints, and then it can be accessed by someone who shouldn't have access.
Right.
So but I think if you are talking about a basic level of security, make sure your authentication is secure, make sure your authorization is secure, and then make sure that there are no XSSs, and that's pretty much it. The rest, like SQL injections, really hard to have a SQL injection issue in Rails now because 80% of the APIs in Rails in their active record are safe and secure. And for authorization, what I always recommend is use a whitelist approach rather than a blacklist, because it's always better to have someone complain about not having access to something they should have access to than realizing, oh shit, somebody has access to something they shouldn't.
Right.
Because then you need to report it and to your customers, etc. If you have it's basically a data breach. If somebody can access things they shouldn't.
Well, one thing I'm curious, I know we're short on time, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on like one common pattern that Rails has embraced has been this like RESTful resources like targeted by IDs, and like part of the problem with that is it's like guessable because they're like sequentially ordered IDs. Like, do you feel like Rails is like overdue for like a new pattern there, or like is it not worth the effort to try?
It doesn't matter, even if it's guessable or not guessable. I found authorization issues with the UIDs because they are not secure. They can be guessed, they can be brute forced, and they can be leaked. That's the most common thing. That you have UIDs and you think, oh, it's safe, we don't need authorization, but somewhere in your API you leak the UIDs, and then people can just find them and
security through obscurity, huh?
Exactly. You should have authorization. That's why actually I think numeric IDs are better, because then it forces you to think about authorization. If you are like, oh, it's hard to guess, we don't need authorization. Yeah, down the line you will see for sure you have issues.
Well, the other thing is that typically you're going to see your authorization at the controller level.
Yep.
And so if you've got good tests around either end-to-end or controller tests, you should be able to pick up, person has whatever it is that credentials them, right? Whether it's a membership or a role or something, right? You should be able to test that and say, okay, with reasonable confidence, running my tests every day, or whatever, twice a day, or or every time I check in, right? I can say with reasonable confidence, people don't have access to stuff they shouldn't have access to.
Yeah, but you can still make mistakes, and you
You
introduce a
can.
new feature, and then you forget to add authorization to that. And like, I found an issue recently during a pen test where they were doing authorizations. The same endpoint could fetch one record or a list of records. So they were expecting either an ID or an array of IDs, and they did the authorization on the first item. So what you could do, you could set the ID to something which the user is authorized to have access to, and then you can set the IDs in the same request to something they don't have access to. And then because it thought, oh, it's only requesting one item, but actually it returned all of the items because you
Right.
also set the second parameter. The authorization check was successful, but you could still get access to things which you shouldn't. It's an easy to make mistake, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is for kind of your baseline stuff, if you're testing it, but yeah, you're right. If your strategy isn't well thought out and your test only tests that your strategy works.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is why I think gems like Pandit is really useful, because with Pandit you can turn on a feature which will raise an exception if you don't call the authorize, I think it's called authorize the method in a control action. So it forces you to have authorization in every endpoint, and if you don't, then you might make a mistake, and then it will warn you. And also it really you can do a whitelist approach easily with that one. So nothing can be accessed by anybody, and you explicitly grant access to certain records,
Right.
or certain conditions.
Yep. All right, cool. Well, is there anything else you want to make sure that people know before we do our picks?
I think that's it basically. Rails is still a great choice for security, in my opinion, but still you need to be aware all the time and be on the lookout, because it's easy to make a mistake. Nobody to blame for that. We all make mistakes. We should learn from them and get better.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Valentino, you got some picks for us?
Oh yeah. So I was at the last New York City Ruby AI meetup and happy hour and demo night, which has now been consolidated into a nice artificial Ruby event. So I gave a talk on a project I'm working on called Ruby Tuner to try and fine tune an LLM specifically for Ruby code generation. And I have this whole framework built that wraps Python basically to start, with the idea of over time moving it away from Python as the new Ruby features start to become available. And so I showcased kind of like the whole process end to end of fine tuning a very specific contrived example of turning a URL into Markdown, and then getting a response out of it. So it's a lot of fun. There's a new event in March I recommend people signing up for at artificialruby.ai, and check out Ruby Tuner. And then just like something really fun, and because I always share something very specifically AI, Peter Cooper has been like diving deep. He runs the Ruby Weekly. He shared this really fun and kind of hilarious prompting strategy for basically creating a group of specific authors of software. So he has like Paul Graham and Linus Torvald and David Hannemer Hansen, and like kind of made personas for each of these characters, and then got them into a prompt to like argue over a very specific implementation strategy at a very detailed level. And then and he shared the prompt that he used for it, and like it's kind of fun to to play with this, and it like brings in kind of like a combination of mixture of agent or a mixture of experts as well as like plan and execute, like combination of those two. It's just like really fun to see that kind of stuff evolve and like see a panel of judges judge things in a simulated way. I recommend checking that out. It's just fun.
That sounds so funny. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in some picks. So first of all, I do a board game pick or a card game pick. This week I'm gonna be picking a card game. It's called The Gang. It is essentially it's Texas Hold'em poker, cooperative Texas Hold'em poker. So what you're trying to do is you are trying to, sorry, I'm trying to copy and paste the link while I talk. You're all playing Texas Hold'em. So you have 2 cards, you flip over the river, all that stuff, right? That you're normally do, right? So, and then what you do is once you have your cards, you can, there are tokens out. There's one for each player, right? So if you have 5 players, there's a 5-star token, a 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star. And so what you're trying to do is there's no bluffing in this game, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the tokens to the right people. So the 5-star token is with the person that wins, and the 4-star token is with the person that would come in second, right? 3rd, 4th, 5th. We played it with 3 players, so we, it was just, 3 tokens. So anyway, so you grab the token that you think you deserve, and then somebody may say, no, I think I have that, right? And so usually it's the top one that gets passed around a lot, and the bottom one that gets passed around a lot, right? So it's like, I look at my cards. I can't remember the pocket cards, I think is the term, right? I have a 2 and a 3. I know that I'm probably not going to win, right? But as you flip over the river, maybe you flip over a 2 and a 3, right? So now I have 2 pair. Now I have a good hand. And so, then I may be more aggressively grabbing the top or next to top, and so, and you can't talk about what you have, but, so if somebody has, 3 of a kind in kings, right, they may more aggressively take that 5-star token back when I grab it. But I can take it back from them, and then they can take it back from me. And so then I may be looking at it and going, well, I have 2 pair, but they're kind of crappy pairs, so maybe they do have something better. And then as you flip over cards, every time you flip over cards, you put more tokens out. And so you can see where people are changing what they want to do. And so a lot of times, right, you'll flip over a 10, and somebody who was kind of not sure where they were all of a sudden is really aggressively saying, I should get the top 1. And it means that, my hand went from having nothing to having a pair or something like that. And so you're kind of trying to read the table and figure out what it is. And the way you win is you get 3 in a row, or not 3 in a row, but you get 3 correct before you get 3 incorrect. And that's pretty much it. And then there's a deck of cards, and we only played with a handful of these, but there's a bunch of cards that put restrictions on what you can do, right? And so maybe it takes away a round of tokens where, you would get more information or things like that. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. The Gang, Board Game Geek has it as a weight of 1.64. So it's pretty approachable for, most gamers. I think my kids, I don't know if I'd play it with my kids just because I'd have to explain poker to them. And mostly it's that I would have to, like, you have to explain the statistics and why this hand beats that hand and how to figure out, right? So anyway, that's where it gets complicated, is just knowing which hand beats which hand, and then recognizing I have a straight, or I have a flush, or I have, whatever. So anyway, fun stuff. We played it after it was readily apparent that the Eagles were going to win the Super Bowl. So we played it for like an hour. By the way, go Birds. Anyway, so that's my pick there. And then the other pick I have is I'm pretty aggressively pulling together Ruby Geniuses. I have meetups planned starting on the 25th of February. We're going to be getting into all kinds of stuff. There's going to be a book club at the end of March, and we're reading the O'Reilly book on prompt engineering for AI. So just diving into a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, it's meetups. I'm going to set up a Discord channel for each of them, right? So we can collaborate with that. You get discounts on summits that I'm putting together, right? They're not doing RubyConf this year, so I plan to put on a summit about when they would do that and have people show up and speak at that. So just stuff like that. I'm trying to think because ultimately, I guess the other thing is if you sign up by the end of the week, which means that I guess people, we didn't go live. So anyway, I was also offering, if you had questions, you could text or send me a voice message and I would get back to you, and you would get that for 6 months. But anyway, so yeah, so it's the book club, it's the meetups, it's the collaboration with other people, just the ability to kind of get feedback on what you're doing or get help when you need it. These are the things that really came through for me when I was newer programmer. And what I found is that even as a senior developer, I'm craving that kind of interaction anyway. And so, getting a bunch of people in and, okay, what's new, what's going on, things like that. And then finally, I'm also lining up some of the meetups are going to be with people that are on the show, right? So, I've asked some of our past guests to do them, and we're going to start doing some of those in March or April. So the first handful, I just wanted stuff on the calendar that people were asking me for that I could teach. And that way I didn't have to worry about whether or not I could fill those meetups with other presenters. But yeah, we're going to have a lot more of that because there are a lot of people that know a lot more about stuff than I do. So anyway, you can go get it at rubygeniuses.com. And yeah. Greg, what are your picks?
I have 2 picks. One is a gem called Pandit, which we just mentioned, because I think it's really good for to handle authorization in Rails app. It's a good help, and it helps you to solve a bunch of issues easily, or a bunch of problems. So that's one of the picks, and the other pick is a bit of a self plug, which is I'm working on a course for almost a year about security for Rails developers, and now I'm close to get it ready and publish it, and it's already on pre-sale. And once I record the videos for it, it's basically the written version is pretty much done. I just need to record the videos and then I will publish it. And I hope it's gonna be useful for people to learn more about the caveats of security things in Rails.
Cool. Where do people find it?
Just go on my website. There is a link somewhere on it. Probably I should put a banner on it, but you can find it on my website. There is a link, I think, at the top somewhere. It's on greg.molnar.io.
All right, cool. We'll put a link in the show notes too, and that way people can go and keep an eye out for it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. It was fun again.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll go ahead and stop here and wrap it up. Till next time, folks. Max out.